All right, so for the second part of plant agriculture, we're going to continue talking about pest control. Biological pests are any organisms that damage crops and reduce yields. Examples include insects, birds, rodents, and weeds. Pesticides are chemicals that kill or control populations of these undesirable organisms. Insecticides specifically target insect pests. Herbicides specifically target weeds or undesirable. So there's a class called first generation pesticides. These are the ones that have been in use since the 1600s. They're made from natural chemicals extracted from plants. Nicotine sulfate from tobacco leaves is an example. The second generation pesticides were first used in the 1940s. These are the synthetically produced chemicals like DDT. Following the Green Revolution in the 1950s, pesticide use increased more than 50 times. So unfortunate. So, one of the consequences of pesticide use is pesticide residue. Now, not all pesticides leave a residue, but the ones that we've realized were problematic, we used quite a bit before we realized there was a problem. So, sad panda. Um, these are basically chemicals that remain on food once they are applied. Many pesticides are persistent, meaning they remain in the environment for a long time. They can bioaccumulate, forming higher and higher concentrations in organisms over a long period of exposure. So pesticide residues can also affect human health. This is most likely to occur in produce that we eat whole. So some examples listed on the Dirty Dozen are basically Shopper's Guides to Pesticide and Produce from 2015, basically saying that these are the ones that typically utilize a lot of pesticides for production. Okay, so apple, celery, cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, grapes, nectarines, peaches, potatoes, snap peas, spinach, strawberries, sweet bell peppers, hot peppers, and kale, and collard greens. This list, called the Dirty Dozen, are produce that are more likely to absorb and retain pesticides sprayed on them because they don't have a super thick outer shell to protect absorbing it into the actual meat of the fruit. The Clean 15 are the types of produce that have a protective layer that basically prevents them from absorbing as much pesticide residue, or they're naturally resistant to pests because of this outer layer. So they tend to be cleaner to eat, supposedly. Okay, so this includes asparagus, a personal favorite of mine. Hopefully you don't have the gene that makes you pee smelly things. Avocados, cabbage, cantaloupe, cauliflower, eggplant, grapefruit, kiwi, mangoes, onions, papayas, pineapples, sweet corn, sweet peas, especially frozen ones, and sweet potatoes. You say potato? I say potato. All right. Pesticides have gradually become less effective as insects have evolved resistance to them. So, in this example, in the first population, we have almost equidistant, but maybe slightly fewer resistant beetles. And then we have a whole bunch of the non-resistant beetles. Pesticide is applied, and all that's left are the few resistant beetles. Well, then two of them make babies, and then you get a whole generation of beetle offspring that are resistant because maybe genetics work that way. So crop losses from insects has increased from about 7% in the 1940s to about 13% now. So some advantages of using biological pest control are that it's safer to apply, resistant cultivars are cheaper than pesticides, chemicals are harmful to the user and the general environment. Some disadvantages, however, of biological pest control are the handling of living organisms tends to be a lot more difficult than chemicals because they're live and you can't make them do what you want. Availability and application are limited to relatively few crop plants, so you might have to buy a whole bunch of species-specific type biological pests to control the issues that you're having, and that can get pretty expensive. Parasitism is something that is very useful in biological pest control. The alfalfa weevil is the host for the stingless wasp, for example. The cyst nematode is parasitized by fungi. We can also plan prey-predator relationships. Predators feed on other living organisms, birds prey on insects and rodents, carabid beetles prey on aphids and caterpillars, while lacewings prey on spiders and other insects. So If you're having issues with any of these things, bring in the predator. Structurally, plant structures protect themselves. So that's a predator-prey relationship. Chemicals, certain plant extracts have insecticidal action in them. Pyrethrum from chrysanthemums and nicotine from tobacco are examples of toxins that discourage feeding by susceptible insects. So there's some biological pathways of resistance that we can utilize. One alternative to the use of chemical pesticides is to import natural predators. So here you can see the braconid wasp, which lays its eggs on the tobacco hornworm caterpillar, and also this is also the tomato hornworm caterpillar. The hatched larva will feed on the caterpillar and kill it. Carnivores at their best. Biological pest control continued. The use of phytoalexins are chemicals excluded by or exuded, sorry, by certain plants when they become injured. These chemicals are toxic to pests. We can also use repellents. So there's plants like onion and garlic that have really strong scents that literally will repel aphids. They're like, oh, I don't want any of that. Marigolds help to repel nematodes in the soil. So here you can see some lettuce that was planted with a whole bunch of onions to help dispel a lot of the insects that would feed on the lettuce. We can also utilize something called a trap plant, which is an alternative host for whatever it is that's eating your ideal plant. So pests have preferences for host plants. So for example, slugs prefer lettuce to chrysanthemums. So if you want to grow chrysanthemum, then you can plant lettuce as a decoy crop. Bean and squash production, corn ends up being a decoy for aphids. And then the beans also help to provide nitrogen to the corn. So it's like a happy little cycle. Clodollaria plants trap the larvae of root knot nematodes. Look at those cute little things. Biocontrol is when we, prior to storage, we treat fruits with a suspension of the bacterium Bacillus subtilis to delay brown rot caused by the fungus Monilinia fruticola. Resistant cultivars are the crop producers, basically are using cultivars with resistance against diseases and other pests of agronomic importance so that, we're basically growing something that's already resistant so we don't have to. Microbial sprays like biopesticides, such as the artificially cultured Bacillus thuringiensis, is prepared as a spray application for controlling cutworms, corn borers, and other caterpillars. They're quite useful. This is really commonly used in organic production. So again, integrated pest management ends up being quite useful. It's a strategy where synthetic pesticides are used as a last resort in dealing with insects and weeds. So first, before we ever get to pesticides, we try biological control, the use of natural enemies such as parasites, predators, naturally occurring pathogens to reduce that competitive advantage of exotic invasive weed and insect pests, nematodes, and other plant pathogens. And then if that doesn't work, we employ our other tools like cultural tools such as grazing, crop rotations, tillage, cultivation, and reseeding. Mechanical controls like prescribed fire, mowing, clipping, etc. Genetics and host plant resistance, pheromones, sterile male techniques, etc. And then if none of that works, then we employ pesticides as a last resort. But of course, biological control, such as the use of natural predators, is always the preferred method. So Integrated Pest Management has a free online course shown here that you are more than welcome to check out anytime by following the link. This is a sustainable approach to managing pests by combining biological, cultural, physical, and chemical tools in a way that minimizes economic, health, and environmental risks. The focus is on multiple tactics. 100% pest control is rarely economically necessary or even possible. And then ultimately, the tenets of this Tactic are prevention, avoidance, monitoring, and then suppression. We call this PAMS. For example, we utilize quarantine laws to make sure that we avoid bringing in pests. We use cultural techniques, scouting, and a combination of tools to suppress populations. A part of integrated pest management is pest-free planting material, making sure that we're using pest-free seed, pest-free compost, pest-free mulch, so that we're not bringing in problems. Instead, we're anticipating them. We want to recognize common pests in certain crops in your area and be prepared for them. Select resistant seeds or plants. Crop rotations can also help prevent issues by increasing biota in the soil. So prevention, we want to plan our crop rotations. Rotate between crop groups. Most pathogens can infect only members of a single plant family. So this includes the cucumber family, basically, cucumber, melon, squash, pumpkins, um, Solanaceae family, tomato, potato, pepper, eggplants, beet, spinach, sweet corn, beans and peas, onions, garlics, chives, carrots, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, turnip, etc. Um, but of course, some pathogens can still attack members of many plant families. We want to make sure that we're planting in well-drained soils at the proper temperature, using high vigor seeds, and providing adequate water. We want to use seed treatments, fungicides, insecticides to provide protection. For our drainage, we want to reduce Pythium damping off and Phytophthora root rots. Um, they're going to be a lot more severe in poorly drained soil. So by managing our drainage well, we can reduce these. Our temperature. Our seeds require a certain temperature for germination, so taking soil temperature readings becomes important. Sanitation practices for nursery and growth is very important. Some more sustainable pest management strategies for smaller operations in home gardens include scouting and bug picking, literally picking the bugs off the plants. Applications of diatomaceous earth, baking soda, and Dawn dish soap can be very useful, but they're very expensive on a large scale. So small scale approaches are much better. Utilizing OMRI certified organic pesticides, mulching, providing netting, homemade solutions that include garlic, hot peppers, cayenne, chili, etc., pepper, and tobacco, releasing biological controls, natural enemies, utilizing companion. All of these things are natural ways to approach the problem. Some more sustainable pest management examples for rabbit and deer pellet include garlic clips and granular repellents, garlic and diatomaceous earth-based, fences and fish emulsion, slugs are easily deterred with diatomaceous earth, seaweed, salt, copper ribbons around the garden. Caterpillars are easily deterred using neem oil or spray foliage with Bacillus thuringiensis or BT powder. Grasshoppers, if you dust your plants with flour or make a garlic spray or plant cilantro and get grasshopper bait traps, you can scare them away pretty easily. Powdery mildew can be taken care of by sprinkling plants with baking soda. Note, most of these control methods are extremely expensive. Neem oil, 1 gallon of neem oil is $60 to $100. So understand that while these are great for a small scale, they get really expensive on the large scale, and that's why a lot of large operations can't use them. Diatomaceous earth, 10 pounds is $60. Cost effective for more than 1 acre? Probably not. Some more sustainable pest management examples. Aphids can be taken care of using soap and water or neem oil. Flea beetles can be minimized or avoided using floating row covers or diatomaceous earth. Squash bugs can be hand-picked. They lay a red egg on the base of the plant, and so you can hand-pick those red eggs off before they hatch. Or to even keep them from ever laying the eggs on your plants, you can use floating row covers and netting. It's also said that planting Queen Anne's lace nearby squash plants, there's a natural predator to squash bugs that pollinates Queen Anne's lace, so that could be helpful. I've also had really good luck with nasturtiums and keeping squash bugs away. Nematodes. The Golden Guardian marigolds help keep them away. Neem oil helps keep them away. Shrimp shell meal, the chitin basically attracts nematodes and kills them because the alkaline solution, but also know that it's going to change the soil pH. Here is a picture of a squash bug laying red eggs on a squash plant. So let's talk about companion plants, plant associations, and intercropping. There's a great YouTube video that I want you to watch. You can combine plants basically to attract predators for pests or plant legumes with non-legumes to maximize nutrition. Just to follow up on that YouTube video, I will embed it after this PowerPoint in the page I create. The Three Sisters is a great companion planting association that's well known. It's started by the Native Americans, where you plant beans, squash, and corn all together. The beans provide nitrogen for the nitrogen hungry corn, as the corn provides both a place for the beans to grow up as well as resistance to aphids. And the squash cover the area around them to reduce weed pressure. Potatoes and beans go together very well. Brassicas and alliums very well. Here's a series of companion plants that go together really well. Beans go well with maize, sunflowers, lavender, cabbage, cucumber, strawberries, and eggplant. Beetroots go well with beans, onions, garlic, lettuce, and cabbage. Eggplants should be planted with calendula, marigolds, mint, and peas. Broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, and kale go well with our aromatic plants like dill, sage, rosemary, potatoes, beetroot, celery, garlic, onions, and geraniums. Carrots should be planted with lettuce, chives, leeks, rosemary, sage, peas, and wormwood. Lettuce goes well with carrots, radish, strawberries, cucumber, and beans. Corn goes well with sunflowers, amaranth, beans, peas, and other legumes. Pumpkins, squash, cucumber, melons, and other cucurbits, and parsley. Onions and garlic should be paired with carrots, beetroot, strawberries, tomatoes, lettuce, and cabbage. Peas pair well with lavender, carrot, turnip, radish, cucumber, maize, beans. They grow well with most vegetables and herbs, to be honest. Peppers go well with tomatoes, geraniums, basil, carrot. More companion planting. The marigold. Plant this freely throughout the garden. It repels soil nematodes, aphids, bean beetles, and many more. Use the leaves to make an organic general insecticide spray. Nasturtiums. Plant them with tomatoes. It improves the flavor, and the nasturtiums repel whiteflies and spider mites. And they're pretty. Thyme. Plant well with cabbage, and this basically because thyme deters the cabbage worm. Rosemary can be planted with carrots, cabbage, sage, and beans. Rosemary deters the cabbage moth, bean beetles, and the carrot fly. Wormwood and Artemisia. Plant around your garden edges. This keeps animals out and repels whiteflies. Yarrow. You should plant freely throughout the garden because it repels soil nematodes, aphids, bean beetles, and many more. You want to plant near aromatic herbs to enhance essential oil production. Potatoes go well with coriander, marigold, beans, maize, cabbage family, and eggplants. Spinach goes well with strawberries, broad beans, and peas. Tomatoes go well with basil, oregano, parsley, chives, nasturtium, onions, carrots, celery, calendula, and geranium. Calendula goes well with tomatoes and it repels the tomato hornworm. Calendula is a general pest deterrent planted everywhere, and it's pretty. Chili peppers repel the cabbage moth, plant on borders to keep flying pests away, and plant with cabbage and another tool in our arsenal is agronomic intercropping, which is the practice of growing two or more crops in close proximity in the same row or bed or in rows or strips that are close enough for biological interaction. Mixed cropping, companion planting, relay cropping, interseeding, overseeding, underseeding, smother cropping, planting polycultures, and using living mulch are all forms of intercropping. Here's a great example on a small farm where intercropping is shown. The advantages of intercropping are first that intercrops may use resources of light, water, and nutrients more efficiently than single crops planted in separate areas, and this can improve yields and income. Secondly, crop mixtures frequently have lower pest densities, especially of insect pests. This occurs both because the mixture confuses the insects and, if the mixture is chosen carefully, because the mixture attracts beneficial predators. Finally, intercropping may allow more effective management of cover crops. Here's a great example of conventional intercropping where maize is grown with soybean and oats. Organic agriculture, by definition, have been produced without any synthetic pesticides or fertilizer. Organically derived fertilizer is still used as our first generation pesticides. This is a common misconception of organic production, that it does not use pesticides. It does use pesticides, but it does not use synthetically derived pesticides. Hydroponics is a method of growing plants without the use of soil. Plants are grown with their roots immersed in water containing all the necessary nutrients for growth. This takes place in a greenhouse, allowing for a longer growing season and decreased need for pesticides. Energy costs, however, are very high, so the sustainability of this depends on your outlook. One great example of hydroponic greens and fish lives in Lexington, Kentucky, and it's called Food Chain Lex. This amazing operation took an abandoned bread factory and created a social hub and hydroponic system that includes grains and vegetables grown in a hydroponic system underlain by fish that are also processed and sold in a nearby restaurant. The spent grains, the grains that are grown here are used to brew beer, and then the spent grains from the beer are fed to the fish. So it's an all-in-house system with an incredible impact sustainably on sustainable production. Essentially, this is where aquaponics meets hydroponics. It's an old bread factory in an urban area where they raise fish for local sales, and they also raise mushrooms and various greens. The fish waste is used for nutrients in the hydroponic grow system, and they also utilize it for community education. Pretty cool, huh? Genetically modified organisms. Another alternative to pesticides is to implant DNA into crops from other species that are resistant. These are called genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. Two of the most commonly grown crops in the United States, corn and soy, are now mostly modified. BT corn has been genetically modified to produce certain proteins from a species of bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis. The proteins are poisonous to the European corn borer. Roundup Ready corn is resistant to a glyphosate, an herbicide sold under the brand name Roundup. The herbicide is sprayed on a field, killing undesired weeds but leaving the corn. Harvest. As a result of the changes of the Green Revolution and the introduction of genetically modified organisms, crop yields have increased dramatically. In the United States, the biggest crop produced is corn, with 84 million harvested acres in 2011. As a result, corn is used as an ingredient in many types of processed foods, including animal feed. About 70% of the carbon in the body of a typical American is